Welcome to Boil the Frog Slowly, a radio program that goes where corporate media stops, where each week we ask the questions: are politics hazardous to your health? Are the decisions and incremental changes being made by government and industry creating health problems? What are they? Why don't you know about them? What can you do about it? Not only do we ask the questions, we furnish answers with unparalleled documentation, research, studies, and guests from around the globe, with proof that unequivocally show that yes, politics are hazardous to your health, and you had better be informed before it's too late. Boil the Frog Slowly. A cute name? No. It's what's happening right now to you and me and the rest of the world as we placidly float in a slowly simmering pot of subtle changes. And those who hold the recipe to this agenda count on the fact that we won't notice the heat until we're sufficiently boiled, unable to resist. I'm Pat.
And I'm Sebastian.
And today we're stirring the pot. Thanks for joining us. All right, Sebastian, are you ready for this?
Yes, I am.
All right, today we have a really special guest, Kevin Mottus. He is the 2014 Congressional Candidate from California, District 33. He has a master's degree from UCLA, is a licensed clinical social worker, and an environmental health advocate. And one of the reasons we invited Kevin to be a guest on the show is because part of his platform, is in alignment with our viewpoint here at Boil the Frog Slowly, and that is to minimize radio frequency radiation exposure from all wireless devices and infrastructure to protect the health of our children. And I'm almost 100% positive that I haven't heard many political-minded people speaking out and standing up for this. Have you, Sebastian?
Virtually none.
All right. So with that, welcome to the show, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I have the utmost respect for you two for bringing up these issues and trying to protect the health and well-being of the people of Ohio.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to dig right in, Kevin, and I'm going to ask why, since it really doesn't seem to be politically popular, do you support a ban on wireless devices in schools?
Yeah, well, it's not about being popular, it's about doing what's right. And as you said, other people aren't talking about it, and frankly, our public officials aren't looking at the issue, aren't really doing enough. And so I thought, if they're not going to do it, then I'm going to step up and do it. That's what our political system's all about, getting involved and doing what you need to do. And your listeners should do the same thing, because it's about political involvement, it's about getting involved and doing what's right. Now, I'm a school social worker, so I'm very sensitive to the school issue with Wi-Fi in the schools. This represents the absolutely worst combination: high density, high intensity microwave radiation and small vulnerable children. The FCC guidelines that oversee this microwave radiation simply do not cover children. They exclude it explicitly. They also don't cover pregnant women, and there's thousands of pregnant teachers in our school district. We have 45,000 school teachers, and there's thousands of them pregnant all the time, and we need to be looking out for their health and well-being. For the government to bring this high-density, high-intensity technology, and as they call it, industrial-strength Wi-Fi, into the schools, knowing that the FCC guidelines do not cover it, is simply irresponsible. But what people need to understand about the FCC guidelines is they are not safety standards to begin with. They are simply guidelines, and they are set by the FCC, who has nobody qualified to set safety standards. There's no medical people and there's no biologists. It's simply engineers and technicians making their best guess. There's a lot of limitations to the FCC guidelines. First of all, they're really designed for a 6-foot male who's 220 pounds. Children in schools certainly aren't that size. They're made for short-term exposures originally, 30-minute exposures, not the ongoing exposure that Wi-Fi represents. We have to look at, they only cover burning, acute burning. People don't realize you are covered, so you won't be burned by your phone or your Wi-Fi or anything like that. But subthermal effects or non-thermal effects simply aren't covered by these guidelines. What I want is real safety standards. And to have real safety standards, you have to do the studies to establish real safety standards. And the FCC should not be setting these guidelines. It should be under the EPA, who has qualified people to set these standards, or the FDA. So we're playing a real dangerous game, a shell game, where the FCC guidelines say, and people who are questioning the health effects, these agencies say, well, we are well within and under the FCC guidelines. But what they don't tell you is the FCC guidelines, in essence, are meaningless because they're not real safety standards.
Wow, that is excellent to hear someone who really is informed like yourself, Kevin.
Yeah, and people need to be educated. If they would look at the research out there, and there are thousands, and I understand you've talked about it, thousands and thousands of studies showing health effects going back to, as you've said before, the 1940s. If they would look at these studies, they should be outraged that they're exposing their children to this high-density, high-intensity microwave radiation. Unfortunately, we're going to leave it up to our children to show the real health effects of this kind of technology, and it's truly sad.
Well, and the danger is that as the FCC and the wireless industry is buying time to do more studies, in fact, what they're doing is funding their own research and manufacturing the results that they want. So all those studies you just mentioned, going back to the 1940s, they're essentially just being ignored while the industry radiates the whole population and manufactures science to make it look like it's safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And, people need to understand, Belgium has banned cell phones from children based on the research that's out there already. They are acting to protect children. They are acting to try to minimize people's exposure, which should be our approach. Instead, our government is maximizing our children's exposure and having long-term continuous exposure. And this is really unacceptable. UCLA, there's very few studies that are being funded in the U.S., but UCLA was funded to do a study looking at cell phones and its effect on pregnant women. And what they found is that pregnant women who use cell phones had a higher rate of behavioral problems in their children. Yale also came out with a study looking at mice that were exposed to cell phone radiation, and their infants were shown to have more neurodevelopmental problems as well as behavioral problems. Now, the UCLA study was a repeat of a study that was already done in Europe, and we know that repeating studies is the best validation of its virtue as a research study. Now, we need to understand, when I've talked to the woman, I've communicated with a woman who did this study, and she had the same experience like you're referring to. What happens when you do a study and show health effects, you need to do a follow-up study and another follow-up study. It's these chain of studies that really show results. And she said the same thing that I've heard from other people, and that is, after she came out with this study showing health effects, her funding dried up. And I believe the wireless industry goes to these universities and well within their legal rights and says, you know what, we will offer you millions of dollars to do research as long as you don't continue to do that type of research. If you look across campus at UCLA, they are heavily funding and have contracts to develop smart meters. That's Wi-Fi technology on people's homes. So one side of campus is showing health effects to pregnant women, and the other side of campus is developing a technology that will be exposing children, pregnant women, and everyone in the family to microwave radiation in the form of smart meters. So I think this is how they work, and it really needs to be exposed because these universities need to be held responsible for doing research that could endanger the public's health, especially a public university like UCLA.
When they look at the radiation effects of one phone or one device, they're not taking into account children in a classroom being exposed to 30 or 40 devices plus additional devices in the building. That is a massive amount of cumulative exposure that I'm not aware of any studies even addressing.
The other thing studies don't look at is real heavy users. When the World Health Organization came out and classified the microwaves used by wireless devices as a Class 2B carcinogen, which means to your listeners out there that you cannot say this technology is safe anymore. When they did that, they were looking at studies that showed an increase after 10 years of people exposed to cell phones, an increase of 40% risk of having a brain tumor. Now, they were looking at heavy users, but they, as usual, are playing or manipulating with definitions. They define a heavy user as 30 minutes a day.
Oh, wow.
I don't know many people who only use wireless 30 minutes a day, but when you do that, when you group 30 minutes a day users along with real heavy users, you minimize the risk. And if they would do studies focused on real heavy users, which is like 3 to 5 hours a day, and for these children in schools, they will be using this Wi-Fi and be exposed to these wireless devices 6 hours a day, they will become absolutely real heavy users. If they looked at that population, I believe their increased risk will be more in the range of 250 or 300% of an increased risk of cancer. Parents don't realize this. They need to be educated and informed. And the fact that our government is not warning people, is not funding independent research, and is not developing real safety standards to protect people is absolutely unacceptable. I propose to reintroduce the cell phone right to know bill, and this was introduced in August 2012 by Dennis Kucinich, but he's since then gone out of office, so it needs to be reintroduced. What this bill does is it says we need to warn people explicitly about possible health effects associated with microwave radiation from cell phones and other wireless devices and infrastructure. Number two, it says we will fund independent research, independent of the wireless industry, who's been funding their own research and promoting their own results, just as you said before. And third, it demands that we develop actual safety standards to address these non-thermal or subthermal biological effects associated with wireless microwave radiation.
Now, what I'd like to bring to your attention, because you brought up taking the responsibility away from the FCC and possibly giving it to the EPA. I just want to share with you a seminar that I listened to by Dr. Deborah Davis, who's a former White House advisor. It was done October 2011 in Washington, D.C. It's titled Evidence of Harm, and you can see it on YouTube. In that seminar, she talked about how the EPA, prior to the 1996 Telecommunications Act, had excellent research departments, and they funded some of the best scientists in the country. They really were concerned about the health and safety of everybody. But once that 1996 Telecommunications Act was signed by President Clinton, which essentially was written by the telecommunications industry, she said the EPA pretty much defunded and disbanded their research department. And it's no longer anything like it used to be. So I agree with you that this responsibility of safety needs to be taken away from the FCC, but we also need to closely examine how that's done and where that responsibility is given.
Yeah, absolutely, and I want to reemphasize what you're saying. You know, I'm holding in front of me, in 1992, the EPA came out with a massive report looking at electromagnetic fields and their health effects and the need for further research. And I think the way they categorize EPA 600991016F, if your audience wants to look for it, or they can email me and I'll send them enough information that they can find it. My email is just Kevin Mottus, Mottus, 2014 @gmail.com. But they definitely came up with all kinds of health effects, the same health effects that we're seeing now with people who are exposed to this microwave radiation, and that is an increased risk of cancer, an increased risk of reproductive and developmental problems, an increased risk of cardiac problems, an increased risk of immune system effects, and then an increased risk of neurological problems they now call electrohypersensitivity. You know, what was interesting is, you know, I talk about what I'm seeing out there with people personally, and people say, you shouldn't bring up personal examples, and I say, it is appropriate for me to bring up personal examples, because without our government doing adequate amount of research, we are the research. We are the experiment. And so talking about how people are getting sick, I think, is very appropriate. But when I would talk about this at candidate forums, I had one candidate forum, there was 200 people in the audience. 12 people came up to me afterwards to talk about they were have electrohypersensitivity. That is, they had health effects from using wireless devices. Or they knew someone who heavily used cell phones, developed a brain tumor, and died. What was interesting is there was a woman there who was shooting a documentary on the 33rd race, because it's a very interesting race, and she said, I'd really like to interview you because my aunt just died of a brain tumor and she used her cell phone a great deal, and I suspect that was part of the issue. So people are really getting sick. In Marianne Williamson, who ran for office, one of her high-level staffers came up to me and confided in me and saying, you know, I'm one of those people who's got a brain tumor, and luckily I survived. So people are really getting sick from this, and if you're seeing young people developing brain cancer, breast cancer, and women don't realize when their wireless device transmits, it transmits into their breast also, and the breast is made up of mostly water and fat, and these microwaves, just like a microwave oven, agitate water and fat molecules, are very absorbent. The breast is almost all water and fat, and it's no surprise that we're seeing an increased amount of breast cancer as well as brain cancer Even stomach problems. When you go into restaurants now, everyone has a stomach allergy of some sort. Well, that's because our stomach lining does not like being microwaved. And so we're seeing all kinds of allergies to all kinds of things. And if you understand wireless health effects, you would understand that this is actually pretty normal, given that you're microwaving people. People need to understand, with wireless devices, you are microwaving your body. And the same people who won't stand near their microwave oven when it's working because they don't want health effects are holding up a microwave transmitter up to their head when they're holding a cell phone to their head. And so people need to understand this. This is the basic issue. We are microwave radiating our body. I was talking to an LA Times reporter, and he said, you know what, you have to stop saying that these are like the microwaves used by a microwave oven. He knew something about it. I said, okay, that's right. I said, how are they different? He said, well, actually, they're much lower frequency in a microwave oven. So you're saying that the frequency that we're being exposed to by these wireless devices is a higher frequency. That is, people are actually exposed to more waves per second. He said, that's true. And I said, so actually it would be worse. But I am trying to relay it to some people in a way they can understand, because the challenge with this technology is we can't see it, we can't feel it, we can't hear it, and so it's hard for us to really perceive that it's a danger to us. Unlike fracking, where the water catches on fire and people can say, hey, that's a bad thing because the water catches on fire. Wireless doesn't catch on fire. I wish it did. All we have is people getting health effects. And let me talk about some of the people who are getting health effects. Okay, we need to understand Jim Kelly, the NFL quarterback, is dying from a tumor on his jaw right now. This is a sweet man and obviously a healthy guy. He's a former quarterback in the NFL, has a foundation for children and things. He doesn't deserve to die from a tumor on his jaw, but it's gone from his jaw into his brain, and we expect him to die. People need to understand that LeBron James had a tumor removed from his face after the 2009 playoffs, and this is most people would say, a pretty healthy and virile guy. Some people would say the most healthy person in our society based on his athletic ability. He had a massive tumor taken out of his jaw, and he could have died from it. The fact that most people haven't heard about this shows the power of the wireless industry to control information and the debate regarding this issue. How do they control information? They say to the media outlets, you run that story, we're going to pull our advertising. Now, you need to understand this is millions and millions and millions of dollars of advertising. These outlets do not want to lose their advertising, so they don't run the stories. Now, you can look on the internet, look up LeBron James spring surgery, and you can find it on the internet. Look up Jim Kelly, tumor on his jaw. You can find it. It's being kept out of the mainstream media, though, but it's certainly out there if you look for it, and that's kind of the theme here with wireless health effects. You need to look. Once you look, you can find. And our strategy, our government's strategy, I think, and the wireless industry strategy for sure, is we don't fund research and then we don't look at the research so that we don't find the health effects and we can keep going on and keeping people in ignorance and in denial.
I was going to say, it's too bad that these well-known folks that are having these issues don't speak out, because then people would listen.
Listen, LeBron James could have not just changed the game of basketball.
Yes.
People would argue he's the best there is. He could have changed the game of life by coming out about his tumor on his jaw and warning people about health effects. But who knows how the wireless industry got to him? What I do know is he's now a sponsor for Samsung. So we have to expect that he's getting some kind of payments for what he's doing. But it's not just LeBron James. Sheryl Crow had a tumor taken out of her head, and she said, I think it's due to my cell phone because she understands cancer research because of the other work she does. Mark Ruffalo, the actor, had a big tumor taken out and almost died. Most people don't know that. He's certainly a young, healthy guy. And I was talking to one doctor at a hospital, and he said, brain tumors used to be extremely rare. If you saw one in your career as a doctor, that would be a lot. I said, that's interesting because I have 3 people at where I work have brain tumors, and they're all under 40. That's kind of odd. I have another person at work who had her breast removed because she kept her phone in her bra. And a lot of women are getting breast tumors, and if you email me, I can send you a news report on it, although it's not on my website, of doctors talking about women coming in with tumors on their breast and in the shape of their cell phone, where there's tumors in the site of their transmitters.
People really need to see that because the tumors literally fit the shape of the cell phone transmitter.
Yeah, I can tell you on Facebook, some people post pictures of themselves taking a hike on a mountain and, they're camping and everything, thinking that they're out there in nature. And these women have their cell phones tucked in their bra. And I immediately post back to them, here's the research, get that out of your bra.
Yeah, this is so sad. We're seeing youngsters in their 20s or whatever getting head, neck, face, and eye tumors due to the microwave radiation.
And nose.
And they're not, listen, kids are not using headsets. Using a wired headset and keeping that phone away from your head would do tremendous good in terms of lowering your risk. But they don't know to do it, and they're not being required to do it. I mean, I think cell phones should be required to use headsets. They don't operate unless a headset is stuck into the headset jack to protect people. We could use a frequency that's less bioactive and still would carry data, but we're not concerned about it. We're using a frequency that does the job the best, according to the engineers and technicians. That is, it penetrates walls as well as we can imagine. It travels long distances. But we could develop a frequency that could be much safer. We could also develop cell phones that are much safer. Samsung is actually directing their transmissions away from the head, and just by directing their transmissions away from the head, they've lowered their SARs by 2/3. American companies aren't doing this. They're increasing their power. They're maximizing our exposure, and they should be held responsible, and people need to be informed so they can start looking for phones that emit less microwave energy. Another thing that needs to be pointed out, that if your listeners are using AT&T or T-Mobile, they're using a system called GSM, which is the old system. And why it's important is the old system, when you first get a call, goes to the highest level of microwave radiation emission and then down to the lowest. So it's less efficient than Verizon and Sprint, which are using a new system called CDMA. CDMA goes to the lowest level of microwave emission it needs and stays there, so it's more efficient. Now, of course, AT&T and T-Mobile don't want to switch out their whole system, but people need to understand that the studies coming out of Europe, and there's many more studies coming out of Europe than the U.S., are really looking at the GSM system and showing health effects. And one way they could protect themselves is switch from AT&T and T-Mobile to Verizon and Sprint. Now, Verizon could put AT&T out of business tomorrow just by emphasizing this one aspect of their technology, but they certainly don't want to bring up health effects at all because, as you have said in the past, there are no safe cell phones. There are some that are safer, but there are no safe cell phones. This is a carcinogenic, neurotoxic, genotoxic technology, and it needs to be changed. And the solution is wired connections to the Internet. The Internet is great. Technology is great. Wired connections to the Internet, wired phones, wired solutions, and phones that are designed to be safer, and people who are educated on how to use wireless technologies in a more safe manner.
Supporting this lethal cell tower network that's radiating the entire world needs to go. It just needs to go away. And phones that radiate away from you, well, what about all the people standing around you? The phones are becoming so powerful. The frequencies increase so drastically. Just being within 10 feet of these phones is painful.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. And people need to understand, in other countries, they have associations for people who are electro-hypersensitive. That this is a real thing. In Sweden, you can actually go on disability based on electro-hypersensitivity. And a lot of people are getting symptoms, and they don't realize it's due to their wireless they're using, something very preventable and something they could mediate, and they're just getting sick anyway. It's talking about headaches. We're talking about difficulty sleeping. We're talking about immune system problems. You know, what's funny is I was out and about, and there was a guy who's a third-party retailer for Verizon, and I went up to him. I said, "You don't happen to want to hear about health effects associated with wireless, because I know you're selling this stuff." And he said, "Actually, I would." And so I told him about it, and then he kept asking questions, very good questions. And he asked me to write down things, and he asked me to write down websites. And I said, "Excuse me, but why are you asking about this so much?" He said, "My daughter, she's only 21 years old, and she's having a lot of hormone problems, and she stopped menstruating, and I'm taking her into the doctor, and I have a feeling it's because she's always on her iPad and using so much wireless." So people are having all kinds of health effects associated with this technology, and some of them, many of them, don't even realize that's the culprit, and they're being over-medicated or misdiagnosed. Doctors aren't being informed to look out for this. What's interesting and kind of disgusts me is the lack of action from our doctors. You know, when I talk to doctors about this, they'll say to me, you know, I know a neurosurgeon or a neuroscientist, and he says this is really an issue, so I don't hold the phone up to my head. And I say, well, how about your patients? Do you tell them about it? And they said, no, I don't. I think that's just disgusting. So doctors need to get together and take action and stop being non-political, because the health and well-being of their patients certainly depends on it, and they need to educate each other in looking at health effects. And certainly they're heavy users of wireless themselves, even to protect themselves as a profession, because they're no more immune to health problems than anyone else.
I'm pretty heavily immersed in the patient safety, patient experience world, and been to a couple big hospitals, patient experience events. And let me tell you, the entire 4 days, every breakout session, almost all of them had to do with technology, iPad rounding. How can we improve the patient experience through technology, wearable technology? So I'm fearful that the medical community is not going to be on our sides anytime soon because they're racing electronic medical records. I mean, everything is full blast technology.
Yeah, I agree. And you guys bring up so many good points. I don't know which one to talk about first. But with the conferences on wearable technology and the Google glasses and things like that, this is completely, going against all the research that's out there and just shows their blatant arrogance in terms of developing technology that's increasingly exposing to people the agent that's going to cause health effects. That's the last thing you want to do is wear this technology in your watch on your chest. I talked to a nurse from St. John's. She came over and talked to me here in Los Angeles, and she said, we're seeing a lot more men with breast tumors. And she says, I think that's because they're carrying their cell phones in their breast pocket and they're getting tumors there. I mean, this is ridiculous. The wireless industry is making fools out of some of the most intelligent people in our society by hiding health effects. And it really needs to stop. People need to understand that your wireless device pings to the tower about every 30 seconds. And if you have lots of connections for email and web and using the web a lot and stuff, it's probably more than that. And so the problem with carrying those devices on you is it's pinging in between, and you're getting microwave blast and exposure to those parts of your body that you're carrying the phone on. And that's the issue with carrying phones close to you. Whether it's a man in his breast pocket, a woman carrying in her bra, or women carrying in their back pockets. We're seeing women getting anal cancer. I went up and said to this young girl, I said, you really shouldn't carry that phone in your back pocket because it pings to the tower about every 30 seconds, and you're getting microwaved down there every time it does. And I have to tell you, anal cancer is not sexy, right? And she started laughing, and she said, that's for sure, and she took it out of her pocket. But the kids need to be warned, and they're using the most wireless. They are beyond heavy users. They're almost continuous users. And now with them being exposed early on as children in wireless classrooms, I am very, very concerned because like you said, none of these studies are looking at multiple exposures, and at schools you're going to have multiple exposures and you're going to have long-term intense exposures. So where you're talking about tumor growth over 10 to 15 years, which our society is at that point right now, and that's why when I go out and talk about this, people don't tell me I'm crazy. They tell me very sad stories of people who've gotten sick, and unfortunately some of them died due to the wireless exposure, because we're at that 10 to 15-year mark as a society. But where you're having these multiple intense exposures, like in schools, I'm very concerned that 10 to 15 years is going to be shortened to like 3 to 5 years, and where our schools are going to become literally the killing fields of the future, and we're going to be sacrificing our children and the next generation. And if there's reproductive harm, as I know you all are aware of, then we're talking about exposing and affecting generations to come, many, many generations to come. Dr. Martha Herbert from Harvard came out with a study, and I want to pull it out because I want people to look at it. It says Autism and EMF, Plausibility of a Pathophysiological Link, Part 1 and 2, and it's by Martha Herbert and Cinda Sage. I want people to look it up because she's laying out the articulation that she's looking at effects of autism in the brain and how it kind of progresses in the processes of it, and then looking at the effects of EMF and how it affects the brain. And she says they are so parallel. The idea that they are not somewhat related is very unlikely. The trigger for autism. But my concern is it's like cigarettes of the past. And if you remember, the commercials used to be, consummate. There was always cigarette commercials, and everything's being used, cigarettes, to imply that it's safe. And now, if you notice, the commercials are turning to children, and all the wireless commercials are having children and implying that this is somehow safe as we move wireless into our classrooms. And if you look at our movies, like in the old days where the actors always smoked cigarettes and they were really cool, if you look at more and more of the movies, the cell phone is often the hero. The call is made just in time. If it weren't for that cell phone, and some TV shows and movies now, the whole movie is about the cell phone and the relationship between the cell phone and the character. I mean, the fact that they're putting these product placements in here implying that this is somehow okay really disturbs me, and people need to wake up that all forms of media are now being used to sell this technology, a very unhealthy technology, to our people, implying that heavy long-term use is safe, and the research and studies show that it absolutely is not.
I've noticed the same thing on television programs. It disgusts me when I see the cell phone used. And also, I'd like to bring up the point about LeBron James. If he just did 5 minutes of research, he could easily see the studies that came out of Israel, and I think Sweden did some too, but I'm pretty sure it was Israel just within the last year, did studies on parotid tumors, which are epidemic and daily increasing. They're a major problem. They're occurring right on the side of the head where people use their cell phones. And the studies clearly showed that the upper parotid glands had much higher rates of tumors than the lower parotid glands, and the reason being is that the lower ones are more shielded by the jawbone. But there's a very credible scientific study not funded by the cell industry or the government. There's an answer. It's current. It's less than a year old. Too bad LeBron didn't see that.
Yeah, I mean, he could really take the lead. But another person who's gotten a tumor recently that could have come out and warned so many people and really changed the game is Vice President Biden's son. His 44-year-old son, Beau Biden, got a tumor behind his ear, the most common place to get a tumor from your cell phone. And when the woman who came up to me from Marianne Williamson's campaign came up to me and talked to me, that's where she had her tumor, behind her ear. She said, I'm like Vice President Biden. I got a tumor behind my ear. Now, he could have come out and talked about it and used it as a vehicle to warn people and really change the game. What did he do instead? He tried to hide the fact that he went to MD Anderson Center for cancer treatment. He didn't want to explain why he has a 6-inch scar above his right ear, because his father, along with President Obama, is busy expanding wireless as fast as they can. And this is my concern and belief, that they're trying to expand wireless at light speed right now because they know what is expanded, what is put out there will not be pulled back. So they're going as fast as they can as the research comes together showing that this is a very unhealthy technology. So his dad and President Obama are busy expanding wireless. People need to understand President Obama allocated $25 billion to expand wireless across the country as economic stimulus and put it under infrastructure. You know, we have real infrastructure needs. We need more roads. We need more freeways. We need to address water problems. We need to address the power grid. We have real infrastructure needs. We have problems with affordable housing. This is real infrastructure. Instead, he decided to use $25 billion, which is, to give you an idea, our government funded $2 billion worth of freeway and highway improvements about 15 years ago. He allocated $25 billion, and the government is leading the way to expand wireless into all environments. And people need to understand, when you go to a restaurant and they say free Wi-Fi, what they mean is free microwaving of your body. People need to understand that. And the expansion into retail locations, schools, hospitals, where these vulnerable populations are, is really unacceptable. And to get back to an earlier point that you said, education, has embraced this technology like no one else. And now the medical profession is embracing this technology. And it's really sad. And we know from down in San Diego, we have a university where there was a cancer cluster near where there was a cell tower. And people just hit it and kind of moved on. Nobody wants to deal with this issue, but people are really getting sick. Unfortunately, in our society, when someone gets sick, they don't want to talk about it. And by not talking about it, people aren't coming together and seeing the patterns. And frankly, the public health response to something like this has been interfered with by the wireless industry that has influenced things on all levels. They have influenced public officials. In Los Angeles, they are proposing to Wi-Fi all of Los Angeles. The 3 councilmen who are proposing that recently came into office, and I believe that the wireless industry is coming in and funding these campaigns for elected officials that are desperate for money with the agreement that they will initiate wireless initiatives once in office, because all 3 of them were recently elected. When we look at Los Angeles also is aggressively Wi-Fiing the schools. If we look at them, they had a resolution in 2009 that articulated health effects associated with wireless devices and had a policy of keeping wireless cell towers at least 200 feet from any school to protect children. Now they've reversed directions, and now they are bringing these same wireless transmitters emitting microwave radio frequency radiation into the classrooms in the form of Wi-Fi and wireless devices. They've switched direction, and I wonder, because of all the campaigns of the people who are elected to the school board, if that wasn't an issue. We know that ALEC is a PAC group that is funded by technology companies, and we know that they were involved in the campaigns and the elections going on. So this is how they operate. It's legal. They are allowed, and people say, you're a conspiracy theorist. I said, not at all. This is industry looking out and promoting and protecting its interests, and they've done an outstanding job, and they have the resources to do it. But unfortunately, it's at the expense of the health and well-being of our citizens, and our citizens need to respond. Our citizens need to get involved. We have a representative government, but if you don't exercise your interest in this representative government, it won't represent you. Listen, corporations and special interests are exercising their rights. They are involved in government. They are voicing their opinion. They are contributing to campaigns, and as a result, government is representing their interests. But it's not representing the interest of the common person, and the common person needs to get involved and do what they can. They need to meet with their representatives and hold them responsible. They need to organize with others. They need to ask the hard questions. They need to take whatever action they can to do something about this. There's 3 groups I'm working with, the California Brain Tumors Association, and each group focuses on a different aspect of wireless health effects, but what they have in common is they're all looking at health effects. California Brain Tumor Association primarily looks at the effect of cell phones to the head and the brain tumors they cause. CitizensForSafeTechnology.org primarily looks at smart meter technology and how the microwave blasts from wireless smart meters are making some people very sick in their own homes, and as a result, they have to leave their homes, leave their livelihood in their communities, and some people have to leave the country. This is un-American. This is undemocratic. This is unacceptable. The other group is safeschools.ca. They look at wireless in the schools and the health effects for children and other populations. They are all looking at different aspects of it, but they have a lot in common. And the website that I use and the reference I use for a good source of information is saferemr.com, SAFEREMR.com. This is out of UC Berkeley's School of Public Health. Joel Moskowitz up there has been tracking the research for more than 20 years. He does a wonderful job vetting the research and is very careful to only look at high-quality research and report the findings. If you go to his website, he's constantly blogging updates and research that's coming out regarding health effects. You can trust his research, and you can use it as a resource in doing something in your community to take action to stop this absolutely insane expansion of wireless and the health effects associated with it.
Well, you know, you can go on the internet right now and just see hundreds of sites now. The internet is just exploding with this information, but yet we're not tangibly seeing any results out in the public. And in fact, it's the opposite. The proliferation, the addiction is more than ever. So, Kevin, doesn't it look like what we really need are people like yourself who are ready to try to get into a government position and actually do something at that level?
Absolutely. I call to action every person who's upset about this to run for office, run for some office, run for school board, run for city council, run for any office that's out there. Look for one that you can win, hopefully. But begin the debate. Begin it out there. Listen, I believe that the way to influence policy decision makers is to become policy decision makers and trust yourself that with good intentions you can do it. And surprisingly, our representative system does play well to people getting involved. There is a way to get in office. There is a way to win. There is a way to have impact. And I don't know about you, but I was frustrated with the non-response of my elected officials. And I think the way we can change that is to elect an army of wireless health effects informed individuals across our country.
Are there more people out there like you running for office that you know of?
Not that I know of, but maybe I'm just first of many, and I like to think that I'm the first of many, showing that it's very much possible and very much needed. And I think that's the way we take back control of what's happening out there.
Okay. All right.
I agree. And this is going to be a very difficult challenge that lays ahead of us, because right now, the people that sense the urgency and can see the danger are the ones that feel it, like Pat and myself and many others we know. But the problem is, with the proliferation of radiation everywhere from cell towers and Wi-Fi, it's hard for us to get out and physically spread the awareness, because the exposure literally just makes us sick. And this is what all other people that suffer from this are feeling. So we need people like yourself that can still handle the exposure to try to get awareness spread.
Absolutely, and the family members of those getting sick can be critical in terms of taking action. But people need to understand just some basics. If you're using a wireless Bluetooth in your ear, it works at a frequency of 2.4 gigahertz. Just so people understand what this means, it means 2.4 billion electromagnetic cycles per second hitting your head. That's just not natural. What's natural in the environment is about 100 hertz. So you're 2.4 gigahertz. Now, what's very disturbing is I just saw a commercial from Verizon. They said we went from 3G, which is 3 billion electromagnetic cycles per second. Now we're going to 4G without any research about health effects to worry about it. And now I saw X-Lite is 2 times 4G. 2 times 4G.
It'll never end.
With the network they've developed using cell towers, they can deliver this unhealthy technology in a more and more intense way. And I don't know if you've talked about it, but I have to talk about it. You know, people should be very disturbed about the 1996 Telecommunications Act.
Absolutely.
And the gag order they put on local communities not to be able to talk about health effects, only being able to talk about cosmetic effects. Right. Now, why would you have to pass a gag order to not talk about health effects if there were no health effects? That's my question.
Absolutely.
And I want to tell you that it was Bill Clinton that signed that act in, along with Vice President Gore, and that the Democratic Party has been going boot to boot, shoe to shoe, along with the wireless industry, and taking their money in the process. And people need to understand, how can this all happen? Well, you need to understand the new chairman of the FCC is the former CEO and main lobbyist for the wireless industry. He delivered an almost $1 million campaign contribution to President Obama before he was nominated to chair the FCC. For the former main lobbyist and CEO of the Wireless Trade Organization to run the FCC that regulates the wireless industry is so beyond a conflict of interest. It is political and legalized corruption. This is the same guy who's talking about eliminating net neutrality. This is a bad guy.
He wants Wi-Fi on airplanes,
too. He wouldn't do this. He said he wouldn't do this. He said he wouldn't do this. He's a lobbyist. He's paid to say one thing and do another. People need to wake up. Our public agencies that are supposed to protect our health and the environment are being sold to the highest bidder. I said, I want true transparency. Let's put all those positions on eBay and let everybody bid on it. It'll raise more money for our government, and it'll be true to what's really happening out there. Everyone shouldn't need a lobbyist to buy a position in government, you know, because that's what's happening. And this is irresponsible. When I talk to people who are concerned about food GMOs, they said the same thing's happening with the FDA. The executives from Monsanto are very high up in the FDA making policy. How can they be making policy regarding issues that are affecting their own industry? This is so beyond a conflict of interest. People should be very disturbed. Our country, our government is being sold to the highest bidder, and our health and the environment is being sacrificed in the process. Let's talk about President Obama. By embracing fracking, he has compromised our water supply. Okay. By embracing food GMOs, he is compromising our food supply. And now by embracing wireless technology, he is compromising our air quality and the carcinogenic effect in our air as well.
How about our future reproductive ability?
Exactly. So he may call himself, and the Democrats may like to say they're environmentalists, but they are far from environmentalists. And with the wireless, they are bringing on one of the most pervasive, threatening environmental threats of anyone.
And Al Gore is sitting on the board of Apple, vigorously working to get Wi-Fi and iPads into every classroom. And Obama's working directly hand in hand. In fact, that $25 billion you mentioned that Obama allocated for schools is only a part of the equation. He's also worked separate deals with Apple and other companies to have them fund the devices and Wi-Fi to have them put it into schools so he could bypass Congress and essentially have a two-pronged attack with just getting every school wired in the whole country very quickly.
Absolutely. And you know what? People only need to ask Steve Jobs if wireless is safe.
Yeah, right.
Because he always tested his devices. He was a real micromanager in that way, and that's what made him good and also difficult. You can imagine he had 2 or 3 wireless devices on his waist, and they were communicating probably with each other as wireless devices do. And in between that was his pancreas. And pancreatic cancer used to be rare too, but not anymore, as people are carrying devices near their pancreas. And so we only need to look at the pioneer of this wireless exposure to look at health effects. Okay. The co-founder of Microsoft, Paul Allen, has had long-time problems with leukemia and cancer, and he was the one doing all the programming and working with the computers close at hand. We should really call on these guys to really lead the way in looking at health effects, but they're not. And they need to be called out for not doing it. And the wife of Steve Jobs, who's expanding this into schools, needs to be called out and needs to be educated and needs to have her foot held to the fire as she expands this really unhealthy technology into our schools.
Kevin, do you personally have any feelings from the exposure yourself physically?
If I use a computer for long periods of time, I get a little bit of tingling. But my main thing is, I'm a social worker. Like you, I love and care about my community. I had 3 co-workers develop brain tumors. I had one have her breast removed. I had another one develop colon cancer where she carried her phone. She's very much younger than me also. I worked in the hospitals, and we were seeing salesmen and lawyers who use a lot of wireless coming in with brain tumors. So I knew about this years ago. They were very heavy users, and they were very healthy, and the first thing the doctors were asking was, how much cell phones do you use? So I've had a lot of exposure of people who have gotten sick. I was informed enough, long enough, to look into the health effects and wanting to take action to protect myself and my community and my friends and relatives, and that's how people should look at it. This is really about taking care of us. This is about taking care of the U.S. and Americans, and we can't leave it to someone else because we're all being affected. This is not my issue. This is everyone's issue because we're all being exposed. And the electro-hypersensitive people are like the canaries in the coal mines. They're warning us that this is an unhealthy agent. They're developing electro-hypersensitivity, and they may be minimizing their exposure. Down the road, they may be the least affected with serious health effects because they've had to stay away from it. But other people are developing cancer. Other people are developing immune system problems. All these immune system problems women are suffering, especially fibromyalgia and all kinds of systems where the system is going haywire, can be explained by these microwave exposures. People are having cardiac arrhythmias. Some people having cardiac arrest. One of the guys at work, I was working, a very young guy, had a cardiac arrest, had to go in the hospital. Was in the hospital for 2 weeks. They could not figure out what was wrong with him, and they worked him up and worked him up. And I said, let me ask you something, what's your wireless exposure like? Now, he was getting his PhD, so he used his wireless laptop, he had his wireless phone, he was using wireless everywhere all day long, and I think he was electro-hypersensitive and was having cardiac arrhythmias as a result. I said to him, turn on your wireless device next time you get examined and see if you show results. So, this is a very serious issue. Everyone's being exposed. All of us are being affected in some way, some more than others. And the electro-hypersensitive people are really our heroes, as they really try to let us know and are forced to let us know that this is a very unhealthy agent that we're exposing ourselves to.
Wow, Kevin. Can you share with us again your website so our listeners can find you on the internet?
My website, Kevin, Mottus, 2014.com. I would encourage people to switch from AT&T and T-Mobile to Verizon and Sprint. I want people to use wired headsets to keep the phone as far as possible. I want to see people minimize their overall exposure, and one of the things they should be concerned about is wireless routers at home. They can call up their provider in about 3 minutes, turn off the wireless in their router, plug a cord in the back of their router and run it to their laptop, turn off the Wi-Fi or wireless in their laptop to reduce that transmitter, which is up close exposure. And then in the studies that look at brain tumors associated with cell phones, they're also looking at portable phones at home because they're about 80% as bad. They also cause brain tumors. So you don't want to use a portable phone at home as well. You want to use a land-wired phone. So iPads are pretty much a no-no because they only can be used wirelessly, but you can use a laptop plugged in by a wired connection instead. And those are some easy, probably half an hour, less than $50 corrections people can make to significantly reduce their exposure. And of course, don't sleep next to your cell phone while it's on because it's pinging all the time to the tower and you're getting blasts. Certainly don't put it under your pillow, which some people do. Try to carry the phone away from your body. Use a clip if you're a woman so you can clip it to the outside of your purse. Even a couple inches makes a difference. Use a flip phone. They're 3G instead of 4G. So flip phones are a good way to go. The battery life, they last forever, and they're very inexpensive. So those are also benefits.
Kevin, I think another thing that you should really emphasize to people is to buy a RF detection meter because this is, as you said, you can't taste it, see it, or smell it. For about $200, someone can buy a nice 10 Mars TM95, and it's simple. You turn it on, and boom, there's your reading.
Well, good, yeah.
Oh, this is just fantastic, Kevin. We really hope to have you back soon. An hour is not enough with you.
No, absolutely. You're just a wealth of knowledge and so much passion.
Oh, definitely. Well, I care very much about people, and I want them to be healthy.
Well, thank you for joining us on Boil the Frog Slowly Radio. Please come back next week, and for more information, go to the website boilthefrogradio.com. And until next week, remember to practice safe phone.
Boil the frog slowly, you're a frog in a pot. Turn out the heat and things will get hot. Will you jump out or will you burn? Listen to the show and you will return to Boil the Frog slowly.